Good evening. It is Wednesday night, and welcome to Heathen Conversations. I'm Lauren. Let's get started. I'm very excited to have Winifred Rose with us tonight. And Winifred is, I would call, probably the foremost expert in heathen soul lore. Uh, Mainly because I think Winifred's probably been studying this longer than I've been heathen. And I know this because I remember being a brand new heathen and finding some of your writing when I mean being brand new. And then I remember once again being brand new and being introduced to your writings by my friend Danielle. Uh like I said, when I was a baby, I hate to use the term baby heathen, but 20 years ago. So you really have kind of set the bar on especially soul lore, and now you have put all of that into these two books as well as your website. So thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your knowledge with us.
I'm very happy to be here and glad to be invited.
So I always ask this question of everyone because I always think it's important to I think it's important to talk about the variety of experience of how people came to heathenry. How did you find heathenry?
Well, like many people, it was sort of a step-by-step process. I had been quite a devout Episcopalian for years, and but was having trouble with two aspects of the Christian religion. One of them being the lack of feminine representation in the divine, and the other one with the idea that humans are a special creation outside of nature. That we didn't arise from nature, but we sort of plopped down from somewhere else, and we're not really related to it. And that didn't ring true to me, but it really hit home. And I talked about this on John Hyatt's podcast too. Um, a Jewish friend of mine had visited uh, the Holy Land, and when he came back, he wanted to tell me about all the neat stuff he'd seen. And he said, "Oh, you're going to really like this." And I thought to myself, why would he think that I would be that excited about this Holy Land of some other religion? And then it occurred to me, well, he knew I was Christian, and Jesus lived there and everything. So it should have been meaningful to me, and yet it wasn't. And so I started asking myself, well, if this is not my Holy Land, where is my Holy Land, and why is that holy? And I started just thinking about the monolithic remains in Northern Europe, and in fact, the cathedrals and stave churches, the things that hark back to an older time. And then I started thinking all the celebrations and rituals that I enjoyed in this very old-fashioned Episcopalian church actually had pagan roots. And that started me looking in the other direction. And then I actually came across a book of Troth, Edward Thorson's Book of Troth, and that had the address of the Troth in the back of the book. So I wrote and joined the Troth. That was at the end of 1993. So I'm almost at my 30-year anniversary next year. I'll be at my 30-year anniversary. And then I started having dreams of the Norse deities, especially Frau Holle, and I sort of knew who she was. And then I had a dream. I was walking in this beautiful landscape, and there was a huge cherry tree in bloom ahead of me. And I walked up to this tree, and there was Odin, hanging from this tree with his eye was all bloody, his eye socket was dripping blood down his face. And I have to admit, my very first reaction was, oh, gee, this is really spoiling the view for me. It was sort of a hard-hearted reaction. And then I felt very ashamed of myself for thinking that. And so I helped him get down, and I washed his face for him, and then we talked, and he started leading the way. And between him and Frau Holle, they just kind of led me down the path to heathenry. But what finally clinched it for me was reading Bauschatz, because I'd always felt I should be a philosopher, and I tried again and again in college, to take philosophy courses, and I just didn't agree with the philosophical views of the world that were presented there. When I read Bauschatz, it was like, this is how the world works from my point of view, from my perspective. Here's a philosophy I can really get into. And, from there it was off and running.
And that's interesting. You're one of the only people I've ever come across who had a similar experience where there was that draw to the philosophy and kind of the ideas of heathenry and not just the gods. Um, that was a big draw to me as well. And I think that can be such a huge draw because to me it is such a unique and fruitful way of belief and living.
Yes, yeah, very much so. And across all the perspectives, from the practical everyday to, sort of mid-level things like healing and community, and then, to the heights of metaphysics and philosophy and theology. It covers all the bases. And there's just always more. It's interesting because, I resisted the deities for a while. I never felt that strongly. I mean, I knew the stories and everything, but I never felt that strongly drawn to them. And they seemed, and I was kind of intrigued by heathenry, but they seemed so two-dimensional somehow, the deities. And then after I started having the dreams, all of a sudden it was like they sprang into 3 dimensions. They were actually real beings, that I could interact with.
So you have written these 2 wonderful books on soul lore, as well as your website, which is, I mean, has been a huge resource for a lot of us for a couple of years now. I know since I believe it's about what, 2 years that you've had the
2
website
years,
up.
yeah. And I must say, to toot my own horn, there have been upwards of 15,600 views, on it over those 2 years, which isn't a whole lot compared to, influencers, but considering what a niche subject it is, that's
Oh
not a
yeah,
bad score.
no, not at all. And what drew you first to studying the heathen soul?
See if I can think that far back. um,
Or
there
what
was,
draws you? What draws you even now to studying the soul?
well, I'll think back too, because there were several threads that went into it. One of them is the linguistics, because I was so interested in the languages, and I taught myself to read Old English and Old Saxon and Gothic, and Old High German, and to struggle with Old Norse. I couldn't do what Ben does, or Groa or anything like that. But I wanted to be able to read the literature in the original. And when I was doing that, I started seeing a lot of words for things that seemed like souls. And it was like, well, what exactly is this? And you look it up in the dictionary, and it's like, oh, well, it's the soul, or it's the spirit. I mean, we don't have the vocabulary in modern English. And I'm like, well, why do they have completely different, unrelated words for supposedly the same thing? That's not really how language works. So that spurred me even more to try to read the text in the original, so that I could figure out what they were talking about. And then I started exploring the etymologies with the Proto-Germanic and the Proto-Indo-European, um, um, and started finding a gold mine that way. And that got me started. I also worked, I founded Frigga's Web, and we had a lot of different guilds and halls in there, all of the different things that Frigg and the ladies are involved with. And one of them was the childcraft that I did with Susanna Garrison. And so we were interested in, how the soul comes into being during gestation, and what that means for support for the parents, and for the, teaching for the babies and the children and so forth. And it just kind of kept snowballing from there. And the more I found, the more the more I kept finding, just like the quotation from Odin, and a deed finds me another deed, and a word finds me another word. That certainly certainly was what happened. And I have to say too, I think my Hooger soul just, all of my souls woke up with this treatment, with all the attention, with actually being given their proper names again, their words, their descriptions. But the Hooger is so good at finding hidden knowledge. It's so good at occult and philosophical work, and also the subtle social cues and everything. And I just feel like my Hooger's open doors left, right, and center, and I can barely keep up following it and trying to write about what it shows me.
So with the soul, I know that I have I would say I have a intermediate understanding. I have read your books. I haven't delved too deep in them because I have way too many. I have helium hand syndrome and I have way too many irons in the fire. Um, but I have studied a bit, and I know, especially when I'm speaking to new heathens, people who are new, and I try to explain the soul, their eyes glaze over and they start
I
to get
know.
really confused, and then I think some of them just check out. Uh, so very briefly, on like a very third grade level, explain the elementary school heathen 101 level. Can you explain the heathen soul?
I knew you would ask me this question, and it's hard. It's hard for me too. And by the way, I have written several pieces that are on my website and chapters in my books that try to approach an answer to that question in different ways. So in book 1, there's a chapter called "The Awakening of the Souls," um, and I'll review that in a minute, where I give my vision of how each of the souls come into being and kind of get wrapped up into who we are. So that's one way to look at it, and that's kind of like telling a story about how they come into being.
And the link, if you look down in the description box, the link to her website, which has all of her writings as well as links to purchase the books, is in the description box down below. So just to let you guys know, if you're watching this live or if you're on the replay, that is where the link is for that.
And then in my new book, I have a chapter and I just now posted it on my website a couple days ago. It's called Fields of Awareness, and I summarize how each of the souls is aware, what it's aware of, why it's aware, what function that awareness serves, how that's wrapped up with its will and its other faculties. So that's kind of a summary too, and that's in preparation for the next steps and some of the next books about weaving these fields of awareness together into a whole textured tapestry. Okay, so I will. I think I'll approach it like the awakening of the souls. If you want to post that Fields of Awareness, that'll be on the website too. It's under the. There should be one a menu header that's recent posts, and it's under that one.
And it is a great, yeah, it is under there. Like I said, just go down to the description box and click that, and that'll take you right to her website.
Okay, so the awakening of the souls, and this is how I tell the story. The Sayawalo soul is a being that arises spontaneously in hell, and hell is its dwelling place, and that's the shade, what seems to us like the afterlife soul, although it's also a before life soul and a during life soul. So that's living in hell, and that has the capacity to send up a phantom shape of itself, which I call the Dwemer. It's kind of like the eidolon and the psyche in Greek mythology about the souls. So when conception takes place in Midgard, between the father and the mother, and the new fetus is conceived, that is when the Farah soul also springs into being, and it's like a flash of lightning. And I liken it to nuclear fusion, as the egg and the sperm fuse together. And so this fiery soul calls forth the Dwemer from the Cywillow in hell. And the Dwemer rises into Midgard. And once it reaches this newly formed being, it forms an alchemical matrix that attracts and bonds all the other souls. So then those two, when the Dwemer and the Farah meet together, they send forth echoes, like vibrational echoes, and that forms our Hama, which is in the shape of the Dwemer, and that shapes our physical body after itself. The Hama gives us, I believe that it's formed from the three things that are listed in the Voluspa that Lothar gave to Ask and Embla, the La, the Lati, and the Liter. The La is the life energy that's contained in the blood and that energizes our body. The Lati is our voice and our behavior, our ability to take action, to act as physical beings. And the Liter is our appearance, which again is reflected from the Dwemer into the Hama and then into the Liter. And then as the child grows, so these souls gestate the child and help it to grow and develop. And then before birth, the Norns give the alder soul, which carries with it our Orlog. And it also links with the Haminya and the Hama soul. But in addition to that, our alder governs our lifespan. Again, that's a link with Orlog. And it feeds us with energy. The word alder comes from the word al, which means to nourish. So it feeds spiritual energy into all of our souls, and it controls, and of course that energy helps us to increase our lifespan and our vigor and vitality. And then it's time for the birth. And as the baby is born, the next two souls come into being. So the Amma, I see as the opposite pole. So the Cywillow is down here in hell. The Amma rises, is in the spirit mist that rises up above Ginunga Gap. That's like the ultimate spirit that all the religions, mystics, try to reach, the sense of universal oneness. It hasn't yet differentiated itself into personal beings in any way. So when it's time for us to be born, the deities grasp a portion of Amma and they wrap it up in the soul skin, which is our ghost. So our ghost is like a pod existing in the field of Amma, and it breathes Amma in and out of itself, but it shapes us into a personal being with our own personality, our limitations, our abilities. These two souls together, the ghost and the Amma, are the ones who can channel inspiration and wode, creativity, intellectual power. Those all come through those souls. And so with our first breath of life after we're born, they blow the ghost with its container of Amma into us. And then there are two souls that are more Midgard associated, and they, I think, don't actually completely join us until after we're born, although they're hovering around, the Hugr and the Mod. Mod gives us our urge toward survival, our willpower, determination. It gives us a lot of ability, strength, intellectual strength, mental, physical, emotional strength. Our moods are reflections of our Mod soul. And it can be a very wise and strategic soul, very active, or sometimes it can be cruel and domineering, selfish. And the Hugr is also a very Midgard-oriented soul, and it gives us access to hidden knowledge. It gives us many traits of our personality, intentionality, our social interactions are mostly motivated by Mod and Hooger. And when we have all of these souls together, I picture them singing a song, and that song gives rise to our Sefa. The Sefa is the word itself is related to the word for self, and it's the soul through which we relate to others. It's our sense of self and our ability to perceive that other people are selves too, and that we try to relate to them. So that's kind of a nutshell. I hope there's really no way,
Yeah.
to distill 20 plus years of work into 10 minutes of explanation.
No, that makes sense. That gives you kind of a very high level overview. Um, and it definitely kind of speaks to what I think we always say is the soul is very complicated. It's not just, I know having grown up, even if you don't necessarily grow up raised Christian, especially if you grow up in the United States, you are raised in a Christian culture. And so the idea of the soul is very, there's a very distinct idea of the soul as being a singular entity. And so when you're introduced to this, all of a sudden, this multi part soul idea, it can really baffle you and be a lot to digest. And that's why I'm so glad that you wrote the books that you have, the two books that you have, because it, one, I think for me, it makes it easier to digest and start to understand. But two, um, one of the things that I think a lot of us deal with, and especially someone like me who's in the recovery community, um, are dealing with things like trauma and generational trauma and how that relates to the soul. A lot, for me, a lot of the traditional programs don't work because I don't feel it addresses the actual spiritual malady that I feel I have, the soul sickness that I have that affects my recovery. And so your work I know has been very seminal in a lot of the heathen recovery spaces because it actually addresses these different parts of the soul and the imbalances that can cause soul sickness that can, for at least for me, and I'm not, this is not dismissive of the physical processes because believe me, physical addiction is a real thing, physical process of anxiety and need, but there's also to me a spiritual part as well. It's a three-legged school of mental, of emotional, spiritual, and physical. And the spiritual part has always been so hard to address before I found your writing, for me personally, because then I was able to start understanding where these imbalances in my own spiritual health could be and how to address them. And that's why I was really excited about the second book coming out
Well,
because the second book has been even more.
that's what it's meant to do. And this I wanted to do this, and this is a good moment to jump in with this and put in a plug
Yes.
for my some of my plans for next books. I have several books in the planning stages, and one of them, I really want to put out a call to the heathen community to help me with it. What I want to do is applied soul, or I would be calling this probably soulcraft. And healing, of course, is a huge area where it needs to be applied, healing across all kinds of issues and spectrums, in addition to things like parenting or ethics, living an ethical life. I mean, there's so many ways that it can be applied to everything. But obviously, I'm one person, and I have my own issues, and then there's issues I don't have and that I don't have experience with. Um, and I would like people who have read and absorbed some of the solar, and of course they might have somewhat different views, but if there's anything useful in there that they have been able to apply to their lives, I, I'd like anything from a paragraph or two of people telling me about their experience, to a whole chapter, like a therapist or a heathen therapist or a pagan therapist might be able to write a very helpful chapter, and how other people could help people that they're healing. Um, so I hope this reaches a lot of heathens, and I hope that you will contact me if you have any feedback now or in the future, so I can start putting together a book along those lines that, that reaches way beyond my own experience level in a lot of different directions.
Now, do you have any groups or plans for, I know with Frigga's Web you used to have some guilds, but do you have any plans for any groups or guilds for people who might be working with that kind of soul crafting work?
I would really like to do that. I would like to have a troth program, similar to the esoteric program or the lore program or something. If there's enough interest, where we would train people. And I would also like to have this program, be able to reach across to other programs, so that if someone's in the clergy program but wants to do an elective in soul lore, for example, we could set up a course that would fit that, and same with the esoteric programs and any other lore program or whatever else might fit. I just like to network with the programs and have our own if there are enough people who want to get into it. It is a lot of work, as you can probably testify. There's a lot of studying, and I know people are busy and involved in other things, but yes, I would like very much to do that. We do have one study group that we're just starting up now, and I would see having more in the future whenever there's a group of people interested.
Yeah, that's kind of what, I will be honest with you, something that was kind of what I always harp on within the Troth, but pretty much any organization, is I love the idea of interdepartmental cooperation.
Yes.
Because we are so much stronger when everything is working together. And in fact, I will just take this to plug for a second that in 2 weeks, I'm going to have Diana on to talk about our clergy program, what it means to be a Truth God person, what the training is like, because that's something we get so, like, I would say that I used to answer the Truth's general email, and that was probably the number 2 most, like, requested question that we got, was like becoming clergy. uh, Number 1 was questions about membership, but
Mm-hmm.
number 2 was clergy. So, I'm really excited about that, and I do think that it's very important. Um, and I think that soul work, especially within healing, that's something that I'm so very interested in, because of my work with recovery, because of my own, personal journey, and because my own connection as well with Frigga and her handmaidens. Healing is such a important thing, and sometimes I think it gets, I don't know, sometimes I think it gets overlooked sometimes for other, I hate to say flashier things, but to me, healing is such a hard and basic thing, as someone who grew up in, dirt witch, Ozark folk magic, that healing is such a huge thing. And I definitely would love to see more of a push towards that and learning things about the soul and healing. And especially given that we are currently in, not just, we're, with the issues with the global pandemic, but we're currently in a global mental health pandemic as well.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
No.
the more people we can equip, especially our lay leaders, to be helpful with this, the better.
Well, what I'd like to do is if we could put together a working group on healing and soul lore, um, and and produce, articles and guidelines and so forth, that once we get enough of it, we'd put it into this book that I want to do. And the more people involved with that, the better. One of the many projects I want to work on is what I'm calling Soul Lore Simplified, because I realize we need that. And especially for people who are focusing in another area, like being a God person, and don't have time to spend months studying all the details. Um, so I want to work on that, and I'll put in another plug now. I've been trying to get in touch with the InReach program, because I want to create booklets of my articles for people who can't get on the website. And I think that this Soul Lore Simplified would also be a good product for the InReach program. Um,
Let's Well, I'll say we can talk about that off air, but I can logistically, as far as the working group and stuff, I got you. We can get that taken care of. And if you are a Troth member and are interested in this, let me work with Winifred to get the logistics set up, and then I will get an announcement out on that, or Winifred will to on how we're going on that. But that's not a problem. We can get that set up without an issue. As far as getting something set up for a working group and also the booklets. I got you. I got your back. We can get this. But I think those. I also think those little booklets would be great to have for also just not just for that, but I know we've talked about InReach, but also for mental health professionals. I know something about soul lore, something very, you're talking about like the soul lore or soul. I was, my brain went to soul lore for busy professionals
Yeah, yeah.
because I have so many of those books on my bookshelf for work of different topics that in public health.
Uh-huh.
But that idea would be so great as well for like my therapist who is pagan friendly but not heathen. And so while she understands like the general idea that I'm a polytheist, she doesn't always get everything. And so I have to spend way too much of my therapy time explaining something to her. And
Hmm.
it's your website's been great because I've been able to send her articles and she reads them. But that would be great, especially for mental health professionals as well, or for people who are in long term mental health treatment. I think that would be very beneficial.
Yeah, well, two people, one mental health professional in the Troth has already indicated an interest in helping with this. And I think she's working through the books slowly,
Yeah.
and then hopefully we'll be touching base and going on. And then Michael Guerra, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, is
Yeah.
also
Marco
offered,
Guerra with,
yeah,
yes.
has offered to help with this. And yeah, that would just be really exciting because, as I said, um, I just don't have a whole lot of experience either as a helper or a helpee, with counseling and therapy and so forth. I mean, except for just what everybody has. But
Yeah.
yeah, I need a team. I can't do this by myself. So
No, and that's I think the beauty of once again heathen ethics. Heathenry is a community sport, as I like to say. We don't do these things alone if we can help it, and I think that that's absolutely wonderful. And definitely, like I said, we will get the working group stuff up and going, and I'll get that announcement out here pretty soon. And I
one thing,
also want to pass, yeah,
I just want to say with that announcement, I'd be very happy to see anybody, emailing with their interest about it. But I would like to state right now that the way to start is to start reading and working through the books,
yes,
because people sometimes get all excited about, great, I'm on board, and then what? It's, well, unless you've read the books, we don't have any place to go here. So
yeah. Listen, I need the rest of the weekend to finish the second one, and then we're good. I'm almost done.
no,
It's just
no,
been
I
a
mean,
little busy.
I don't mean that in any
Yeah,
kind of critical way whatsoever. I'm just stating it as a
yeah,
fact that we can't apply soul lore to this area of healing unless we know what soul lore is. That's my point. So
exactly.
yeah,
And I do think that that is really an important thing. But yeah, definitely, like I said, the link to her website, it also has links, and the books are available on Lulu as well as Amazon and everywhere else. There are Kindle versions available, which is very nice, very helpful, and very much appreciated for those of us who are visually impaired, like myself, who need the larger print.
I was
That
also going to
that is
say,
the struggle.
I hope you noticed in my books. I don't know if this will show up here, but I made a point of having fairly large print. Oops.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
and
And
I
well spaced lines and stuff to try to make it, because I don't read that easily either. So I wanted to make
and
it easy
your
to read.
artist, of course, your artwork in there is gorgeous, and that's Dale Wood, correct?
Hmm.
I did a phenomenal original artwork for the publication as well.
Yeah, the first book, and the covers. I know that's really great. And I have lots of little. I love the little photo essays and meditations that I stick in the books. Those are not on my website. Those are specials in the book. And then in my second book, I also have. This is another thing that would be fun to work with the working group. Maybe is I've invented bind runes for each of the souls.
Yes.
As meditations. And I would encourage people to create their own bind runes, based on their own experiences of their souls. And that can be like a therapeutic exercise in learning about the souls.
And that is, I think one of the things that I'm going to bring up with the soul, because I think this is important. I think also understanding the soul, we've talked about this, but I think understanding the soul, how do you think that affects in then heathen ethics? Um, I say this because, especially in the United States, there are a lot of, I'm not going to get specific issues up because I don't want to get into political discussion, but just there are a lot of topics that seem to depend very heavily on at what point life begins or what the value of life is. And for me, more understanding the soul made me more informed in my political understandings of topics like that. So, how do you think understanding the soul can affect a person's ethics?
Well, you mean in that specific instance or
Well,
generally
just
speaking?
overall. Just overall. I was kind of
Yeah,
giving my example, but just overall.
yeah. Overall, I brought that up a little bit in my second book, and it's something I want to focus on more in Soulcraft. There's a number of different aspects to that. And that goes back to something I wanted to talk about earlier, but then we got off on a different track, which is, with a Christian culture that we've all been influenced by, and also Jewish and Muslim, um, uh, um, we have the idea that, there's a deity that watches us and has rules, and if we don't do things right, then we'll get punished, and particularly we might go to hell, or if we're good, we might go to heaven. And this is all up to God, right? And we just have to toe the line. Now, one of the things that's come out of my solar studies is the understanding that the gods may be involved in the coming into being of our souls at various levels, but they don't own our souls. And it's up to us to figure out, what is a good person and how to go about being that. And we don't do it because of threats from the deities, especially threats about our afterlife, because they don't own our souls. It's up to us to decide what we're going to do with them. And before we leave tonight, I'd also just like to mention quickly where I think the souls go in the afterlife. But I'll stay on your topic of ethics. Okay, so that's one aspect is that we're in charge. We're in charge of our ethics, which is a big responsibility. And I talk in my second book about our mode soul and our Seifa. And in Anglo-Saxon and Old Saxon, they have the word mode Seifa, which they use a great deal. And it's definitely a soul word. And I think what it is the meeting space between those two souls. The mode takes action in the world. That's kind of its modus operandi. And the Seifa focuses on relationships. Now, if those two souls are negatively focused, then the mode Seifa is going to be, savage or bitter or selfish. It's going to be a space where all that matters is you and what you want. But training the mode and Seifa to create healthy relationships and to act on your beliefs in the world and put them into action, then your mode Seifa becomes this fertile ground for an ethical sense to develop and to be put into practice. Now, a longer answer is ethics involve each of our souls in various different ways. And that's another thing, that I want to work on for the Soulcraft. But it definitely yeah, there's plenty to work with there. And so while I'm thinking about it, let me just say a little bit about the afterlife of each of the souls as part of their nature. So I think that the Saiwalo actually always stays in hell, and it just interacts with its Dwemer of Phantom uh, uh, during life. And then after we die, the Dwemer leaves, all the souls separate. And I see that as, when the Pharaoh came into being, it was like fusion with the egg and sperm fusing. During death, it's like nuclear fission, and all the souls come apart. So the Dwemer heads back to its Saiwalo in hell. The Hama decomposes along with the body, unless it turns into a Draugr, which hopefully it wouldn't. The Pharaoh, I believe this is something that people doing solar studies are kind of researching, but we think it goes back into nature, like as a white of nature or something. The Hooger is the soul, I believe, and I think there's some evidence in the lore for this, is the one that reincarnates. But also, it may not reincarnate right away. It may serve as a Dis or an Alf, an ancestral spirit. And also, if it's the Hooger of an evil or nasty, mean person, it could become a white, like a Merc Alf or a Hag or something, that afflicts people. If the person dies wishing vengeance on someone else, for example, they may come back as a white and afflict them. The mode, I believe, this is just kind of a recent belief that I've been studying from my own experience. I believe it joins our ghost, and that they both go to the god homes and blend their powers, their mode and woad powers, to power their activity supporting whichever deities they were closest to in life. So that's kind of a rewarding thought. Let's see which ones. The alder goes back to the Norns, and it creates our cloak of life, our whole life experience, and it goes back to the Norns and back into the well of weird, and brings the Orlog with it, lays it in the well, and dissolves that way. So which ones have I not said? Amma is always in the spirit realm, so it really doesn't change whether we're in life or out of life. It's always there. So I think I've covered all of them. Oh, and Seifa, I think Seifa is like a hologram, where when you break it apart, it contains, if there's a picture of a hologram and you break it apart, each of the pieces has the entire picture in it. And so I think that each of our souls, when they separate after we die, contains a part of our Seifa, our self, that was unique to this particular lifetime in Midgard. Okay.
So that brings up a point that gets frequently asked, and I believe is tied to this: Valhalla.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of different ideas, beliefs. People hold different thoughts about it. A lot of new people coming in, of course, think Valhalla is essentially Viking heaven, which it's not. That's the one thing everyone at least agrees on mostly. Um, but in your theories and in your work, how does Valhalla how does Valhalla and warriors and the idea of going to Valhalla play into soul lore?
Well, I think that our ghost soul, and probably accompanied by the mode, would normally go to one of the god homes, depending on which deities they worked with most closely during life. So people might not go to Valhalla unless they're on the Odin warrior track. They might go to Thor's Bilskirnir or Folkvang or Frigga's Fensalir or wherever. I think Valhalla seems pretty clearly described as being the place where people who are on Odin's Einherjar track go, and that I assume is the right place for them, and the place where they feel that's meaningful for them to spend at least the next while, however long, in the afterlife until Odin calls them. I think that's a warrior mystery. that's very meaningful for warriors, and those of us who aren't warriors probably don't understand it very well. But I respect what it is, but it isn't for everybody.
So that brings forth kind of another question that kind of ties onto this. You do have some people who are heathens who don't feel necessarily a closeness or a call to a particular god.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I know a lot of people come in and immediately they'll go, "Well, how do I find my patron god?" And I usually try to discourage people from just immediately jumping in and instead study and learn. And if you're drawn to someone, you'll be drawn to someone, kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. But if someone, but I know people who are heathen and they're happily heathen. But if they're not, is it just kind of you'll just kind of go where you go?
Yeah, and I write about this actually in both my books, I think. Um, my theory is that I think it's the ghost soul specifically, which is the ama spirit substance enclosed in a soul skin that shapes us as a person. Um, it's the ghost that goes to the god homes. Now, if a person isn't drawn to any of the god homes, and by the way, I would say that I think it's true for people in other religions too, that their ghosts would go to whichever deity that they believe in during life and that they follow. But if someone doesn't believe in any deity, I think that what happens is that they then have no need for the ghost as a personal being, because if they're not attached to deities as personal beings, the ghost is like a vehicle whereby we as a personal being can relate to gods in personal beinghood. Deities with names and personalities and histories that we can know something about. So if we're not attached to a deity, then we don't need the ghost after we die. We certainly need it during life, but we don't need it after we die. And I think what happens then is that this pond, that's the ghost, opens up and releases the ama back into this free-ranging world of spirit. The undifferentiated spirit that I think rises from the steam out of Ginunga Gap, because they're just not relating on that level at the personal being to personal being level with the deities. And I think that's fine. Um, that's a good outcome too. I think that, and especially people who would kind of have a more philosophical rather than a religious attachment, like you were saying, or just like heathenry for everyday life, but not really that concerned about the afterlife. So that's my interpretation anyway.
And I think it's also a great thing to point out here that heathenry does not punish you for being an atheist
Mm-hmm.
or not being heathen. Um, and that I know is a hard thing for a lot of people to. For me, that was a hard. As someone who I grew up fundamentalist evangelical Baptist, and for me, that was one of the hardest baggage to let go. But that is one thing that is important to bring up. Heathenry doesn't punish you for not being heathen. Uh,
Well, that
we're
was kind
perfectly fine with you. Yeah, that's the good thing, and I think that's an important thing. I always say is we're not our religion doesn't believe you have to believe in our religion.
right.
That almost made sense what I said.
Well, and that gets back to what I was saying a little while ago about that we don't think that the gods own our souls.
No,
We're the ones who own our souls, and we can follow our own natures. Um, so that, which isn't to say that there aren't consequences to our actions. Of course there are. We've got Weird and Orlog and all of that, chilled and everything. So it's not without consequences, but these are natural consequences that come about through the process of Orlog, not because some god is smiting you. Although you
right.
might get smitten if they get mad enough, but that's another
But
story.
that's more along the lines of it's
Personal
kind of like
animosity.
those. Yeah, it's kind of like those stories about people. It's like every time you read about someone getting the god's attention, it usually doesn't end well. And I've always been kind of like, on one hand, I've never been someone who's really gotten the god's attention, and I've always felt bad about it. On the other hand, I'm kind of okay with it.
Um, can I plug another article on my website? It isn't in my books, but
Sure.
it's going to lead to another book at some point. This other book is going to be on the topic of heathen mysticism, and I wrote an article on my website called "Earth, Water, Wind, and Fire: Elemental Modes of Relating to the Deities." And if people would like a sort of a soul lore approach to relating to the deities, I think this is, I enjoy these modes so much myself. It's so much fun to explore the deities and their worlds this way. We probably don't have time for me to go into detail about it, but if people are interested in godly relationships, there's some good ideas in that article.
And believe me, we could probably have you back to talk more about this later, because we could probably do a whole other hour just on that. And I think that is important. I think finding different ways for people to relate to the deities is very important. Um, Something that I write very extensively about is being someone who is a heathen, who's a very devout heathen, who believes very strongly in the gods, who's also someone who's never had the super divine mystical experiences. I can literally count the 2 experiences I've had that might have been mystically divine experiences, maybe. And both of them involved doing ritual and having 2 big crows show up. That's it. I've never had the God phone ring, none of that. And I write a lot about that because I want other heathens to know that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone is having the big divine experiences. And I think having these different approaches to understanding the gods and experiencing the gods beyond kind of, you know, the the very big, you know, I hate to use the word dramatic, but I'm not meaning it. I'm meaning it in like the drama, like traditional, like theatrical drama sense. Way is valid. It's just as valid as if you experience the gods in more small, subtle ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really am for introducing people different ways of experiencing the gods because it's heathenry, just like everything else, it's not going to be the same experience for everyone.
It isn't, and not only that, but each of our souls experiences the deities differently. Um,
Mm-hmm.
both in general, like, mode soul has certain characteristic ways of relating to the deities, and the ghost soul and so forth, but also different people's ghosts are going to relate in different ways. So hence the idea of a whole book kind of focused on not only how our souls relate to the deities, but and that's another thing relating to what you just said, because in this book I'm going to talk about, usually the other religions interpret mysticism to mean a devotional attachment to their deity, and I see it much more broadly. It can it That's an important aspect of mysticism, but it can also be exploring the souls, exploring the other worlds, a more shamanic approach, a more nature-oriented approach. All of these things can be mystical experiences too, and I think a lot of people have probably had mystical experiences in nature, even if they've never had one with the deity, or in their relationships with other people, with a lover or a newborn baby or something like that. That you have these mystical unions with other beings besides the deities, and we shouldn't downplay or ignore those. They're just as treasured.
Ancestral work, especially within
Yes,
heathenry,
very much so.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
which of course draws back into soul lore, especially a lot of my work, my practice does revolve around my DCer, which I think is a big part of, to me, I think what drew me into soul lore in the first place was that a large part of my practice was my DCer and my ancestors and the whites around me versus the gods, and I felt like there was more connection in there, especially with my ancestors with soul lore. Like that's how my brain, when I went started looking, oh, soul lore. Well, that's part of my soul in the DCer, and so yeah, that's how I got there at least.
Well, I
Was
know
my
an awful lot.
curiosity.
Yeah, I know an awful lot of heathens who say, they're closer to their ancestors than the deities, or they're closer to the land whites than the deities, and so I think that's totally involved. And see, I would call that whole thing mystical, or mysticism in its broadest sense, because it's soul connections. And it doesn't
Yes.
have to be only soul connections with the deities. There's a lot of other beings we can have these soul connections with.
And I think it's important because heathenry, once again, when we talk about community, community does not just mean, community is everything, at least to me. It's not just other heathens, it's physical community of other people, it's the gods, it's the whites, it is our ancestors, it's it's community is a broad word, at least for me, how I apply it to heathenry.
Yeah, and plus our ecosystems that we live in.
Yes, absolutely. And that is incredibly important. And speaking of community, I am going to plug a couple of things coming up this weekend. Saturday from 9 a.m. to noon Pacific time, that's going to be noon to 3 p.m. Eastern, is the Troth Essentials study group. If you're interested in joining us, I will be hosting it this week. That information is on the Troth website in our events calendar. And then on Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, I'm bad at time zones. We are going to have our monthly member moot, and that is going to be a volunteer fair. If you're interested in learning how to help the Troth and get involved, then please join us. Information on that is on the announcement email you should have gotten or on the Troth Facebook group. So I have one final question for you, Winifred. That's something I like to ask everybody. Where would you, so you have been involved in this community for almost 30 years. So you have seen a lot, you've experienced a lot. Where, in 5 years, where would you like to see heathenry?
Oh gosh, that sort of puts me on the spot. Well, I would love to see more people familiar with soul lore, even if it isn't my specific brand of soul lore. I'd like to see. I'd like to see. We're doing such a good job with community building, but I'd like to see that even more. Reaching out again, InReach, international, military, all of these different groups, and I personally would like to contribute by. I'd like to put a plug in here. I'd like to contribute to other efforts by offering written materials. And I want to say this, I know there's a children's program starting up, which I'm so
Mm-hmm.
pleased about. And I'd love to work with them if they want to let me know what might be useful in the way of written materials for children. Um, as I said already, the InReach, the military, that would be my own contribution to community building. But I'd love to see everybody else, with their own unique contributions. I think we're on a good track, and I'd like to see us continuing and expanding on it.
Well, thank you so much for being with us this week. I really appreciate it. We are definitely going to have you back probably after Troth Moot because I know we've got a lot of exciting stuff next month. I will not be hosting next month because next month we will have candidate forums for the Reed and for Steer. So someone else will be hosting those next month. So next month we will be get to know you candidate forums, and then in 2 weeks we're going to have Diana Paxson on to talk about the clergy program, and then I believe we're going to have Ben Wagner back in June before Troth Moot to talk about our Troth Volume 3. And the exciting fact is that Troth Moot is coming up. And if you would like to go to Troth Moot, because the exciting thing is if you go to Troth Moot, you get to buy it first. So Troth Moot is going to be in Memphis this year. And if you're interested, you can go to events.thetroth.org, find out more. And if you have questions, you can email trothmoot@thetroth.org and I will answer them because I'm also in charge of Troth Moot this year. I pretty much, I just got my, like I said, helium hand syndrome. It's a problem. I recognize that. But we do have that coming up and looking forward to seeing everybody at all our virtual and face to face events. And quite honestly, I'm looking forward to seeing like people again. It's been way too long since I've peopled. I'm afraid we're all feral now, so So, with that, we will see you guys in 2 weeks. Winifred, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, have a great day and take care.
Let me thank you, Lauren, not only for this lovely interview, but for everything else, all the huge amount that you do. You're a major powerhouse in the troth and heathenry. I don't know what we would do without you. I really don't.
Thank you so much. Everybody, take care.